hint of being violent. Okay, it's a very simple example of symbolic violence. Okay, the word itself is a violent one. It is meant to be hurtful. The second example is the imposition of universal meaning and the ripping from reality it requires. So when we build the symbolic order, we use language to construct our understanding of the world, and in doing so, we take things out of the backdrop or nexus of the real, just this sheer raw primordial being. We take these things out and put them into their little categories and put them into their little places. But in doing so, this act itself is violent. We see a ripping out, a taking out, an isolating, a carving out of the real, and placing into a symbolic constructed reality. Of course, reality and the real here are different. The real is this very primordial state of being, arguably, but we have this kind of backdrop, but reality itself is the social construction. Reality exists in the symbolic order. It's how we use language to construct the world we understand. Okay, all understanding happens through language. So it's this very ripping out of reality that can be a violent act in itself. And funny enough, Slavoj Zizek makes the comment that the most violent speech act itself can be the statement, "I love you," because it seems love has this violence in it, this targeting in, this focusing on one specific person and placing them above all things, all other things in the schema of the symbolic order, and placing them on this highest pedestal can itself have a violent element in it. So, with systemic violence, we see that it's often the catastrophic consequence of the smooth functioning of our economic, political, cultural, religious, etc. systems. Okay? So, we see how is it that it is possible for our society to perpetuate itself? How is it that we are able to sustain our world? Well, if we look, again, we have accepted capitalism as this dominant framework of how the world operates, how the world functions. Well, capitalism itself, while this seems to be also... now, when we say capitalism, it seems that we're only referring to the economic dimension, but what we have to remember is that ultimately capitalism is embedded, at least in theory, is embedded in this democratic system. Okay, that we have this democratic capitalism, that we see capitalism based in, or at least the dominant forms of capitalism, all at least based within a democratic world system, where democracy and capitalism have become the dominant structures over that of communism. This communist collapse has ended the question. Capitalism is the dominant form of social order, the social existence. So within capitalism, we can see numerous examples. Some of them, I'm sure I've made many of them in the past, but we'll look at some of them again. But we look at the system itself and the seemingly acceptable system that we sustain ourselves in. For example, this capitalism itself. We look at the violences that are sustained, that exist, these objective violences, the systemic objective violences that exist in capitalism. Okay. One example is charity. Okay. Charity itself in its relationship to humanitarianism. Well, the very notion of these great humanitarians, Zizek makes the example of Bill Gates in his ability, in his willingness to donate a large amount of his money to Africa and debt relief and charitable causes. But this humanitarian step is only made possible because of the horrible, violent nature of the economic system itself. We look at the suppression and subjugation and restriction and negativity involved in the overall capitalist system, in the distribution of wealth, the production of goods, the class distinction, and so on. And not to mention, or not to forget, the ideological position that we have here as well. So we see with charity that and these humanitarian efforts, that it attempts to rectify the inadequacies of the economic system, which itself has allowed the very surplus to be created. So the problem caused by capitalism is now being cured by the excess of capitalism. Now, while this seems good, at least acceptable, what we have to remember, at least, okay, so we have an excess of money being created in capitalism, and it's going now to help the people who are who suffer because of capitalism. But what we have to remember is that the only way charity can operate, the only way charity can properly function, is by stepping outside of the very systemic parameters of capitalism itself. So we need this. We need to reject the restrictive dimension and the purely essentialist capitalist elements of our enterprise, and focus I've just kind of lost my train of thought there. So yeah, the difficulty we have is that we have to step outside of the very structure set up, the very system set up, in order to rectify the inadequacies of this system. But there's no obligation. And this is, yes, while this is the humanitarian aspect of being able to reject the inadequacies of this, but again, the only possibility for this to humanitarian act to come about is through the gross inadequacies that it would seem far outweigh the if you will, restitution of the charitable donation. So we have an inconsistency here and a very violent act embedded in the seemingly normative capitalist establishment. So the very capitalism that we accept as standard practice and the very condition of our social reality is embedded with a violence towards a large number of its participants.